Hey, are you breaking a lot of saw blades when you're sewing? Well, then you might want to watch this video because I'm gonna tell you all about sewing techniques, saw blades, so you're not breaking as many saw blades anymore and you actually have joy when sewing. Let's get started. This is a saw frame, a tool that jewelers use to cut things out of metal. The main question I get is what saw blade to use with what material, with what gauge, with what metal thickness. So let me start with this one. I've got all of these blades from Pepe Tools here, who is a kind sponsor of today's video, but you know that I work with Pepe because I do believe in their tools. We partnered so many times already, and honestly, this is just a pure joy and pleasure to work with them, and I vouch for these because I've been using them for, how long has it been, like a couple of years. So these are Nano saw blades by Pepe Tools. I've got a whole bunch of them here. So they go from 10 grade, so like there's 10, all the way to 0, and then you could treat it kind of like below 0. So below 0 it starts with 1/0, 2/0, which this is how it's marked. And so yeah, you go from 10 to 0, where 10 is the coarsest one out there, and from 0 to 8/0, which is the finest. Honestly, you don't need all of them. I am so happy that I have all of them now because I'm gonna be able to try them out. But honestly, right now, I would say what you need is something on the coarser side and something on the finer side and something in between. It also depends on what type of metal thickness do you usually work with. Do you work with very thick metal or do you go for finer ones? So my go-to personally are usually 2/0, 5/0 and 8/0. I use the 2/0 with a thicker metal because I don't work with very thick one. Maybe that's why. Most of the time I use 5/0, and I also really love using 8/0. It's the finest one, so you have to be very gentle because this blade might break a lot. But I really like using it because it just leaves the edges very clean and you don't have a lot of cleaning after cutting with this one. And also it's great for small and fine shapes when you want a lot of details and you want it to be very clean. So that's where I would go for this one. If you don't know what blade to use with what metal gauge, you can check online. There are charts available. For example, you can find two on Pepe Tools website. Here they are. One is UK, one is US. The main difference, I believe, is that UK one is in millimeters. These are very helpful. You will find the saw number and all of the details here regarding teeth per millimeters or per inch, gauge, millimeters, all of that, drill size. So I recommend finding a chart like this, printing it out and keeping it close by. But if you forget or you can't print it out, and if you buy, for example, Nano saw blades, they come in a packaging like this, and you've got information on the packaging as well. So for example, here I have 2/0, and I've got information used with 20 to 22 gauge. Brilliant. There's also something like 3 teeth per contact. So what it means is like a 3 teeth rule and it means that ideally you should have 3 teeth of the blade in contact with material when you're cutting. This gives you the best results and also the cleanest cut, and the teeth, the blade is not snugging on the metal. So once you know which saw blade to use, you can start sewing and prepping your saw frame. So let me show you how to do that. Okay, now let's attach the saw blade onto the saw frame. So the blades should be pointing downwards and outward. So when you put it like this, the blades should be up this direction, so towards you essentially, and the teeth should be pointing downwards. And I am putting it on one side. I'm going to tighten it up and then it goes in on the other side. But before I tighten it, I will press the saw frame gently, not too much, against the bench, and that's when I will tighten it, because you need some tension on the blade. To check if the tension is okay, Just pull on it and listen if the sound is okay. This sound is not okay. That means the tension is not good enough. There you go. Now that's okay. Now the tension is fine. So the teeth are pointing downwards and outward. That's perfect. To cut things out of metal sheet or like any metal, you will need a wooden bench peg. It is something like this, or there are also other types available online. The most important thing is for your bench peg to have cutouts, because that's what essentially will help you cut. This one is a DIY bench peg because I wanted to elevate it. So I attached my bench peg using a little wooden block like this over here to just a regular bench vise like that. So ideally you want your bench peg to be at the level of your chest, because that's the best height where you can still see everything very well, and you can have a lot of space here to maneuver your saw frame. But most importantly, your hands are still relaxed and you can keep the movement up and down better than if you were sitting too low or too high, because the most important thing is to keep your saw frame straight when you're sawing, up and down. You don't want to lean in, which in turn forces you to push on the metal. You want to keep it as straight as possible, because that's where you have the straightest line, the cleanest cut. And also, when you're sewing, remember to let the saw frame do the work. You probably heard that before, but it's true. The saw blade will cut through the metal and the saw frame will add some weight to the movement. So all you have to do essentially is to just guide your saw frame, and when you hold it, don't tense up, don't pull on the saw frame, just guide it. Try to do it very lightly. Those of you who are drivers and are driving a car, imagine the same thing when you're holding a steering wheel. You don't want to, hold it like this. You don't want to be very tense. The steering wheel is probably, you're just barely touching it. Relaxed driving, right? Same with the saw frame. At least for me personally, I get the best results when I have my wrist relaxed, have a good grip, but other than that, have it relaxed and just guide it through the metal. And you will notice that once you do that, the effects will be so much better. And next tip, when you are taking corners, again, I'm thinking about a car. So when you're trying to take a turn in a very tight spot, or reverse actually, you would do it in this kind of motion, right? Back and forth. And the same goes with your saw frame. You don't want to just keep sewing and then turn. You don't do that. You make a motion in one spot, up and down, very carefully. Once you feel like you can turn the saw blade, like there's enough room for the teeth, that's when you turn. And also, it might be very tempting to turn like this. And you know what? I am guilty of that. I do that sometimes. Sometimes I'm too lazy and I'm cutting and I will just take a little small corner like this, right? It's fine. It's okay. If you know what you're doing, it's fine. But if you do notice that your blade is breaking all the time and always when you're taking corners, that's probably because ideally you should move your metal, not your saw frame. So your saw frame should really stay just in one place, just in one position like this. Obviously you're not gonna, that's when you tense up. You're not gonna, just tense up and hold it like this. But try to keep it in one spot and turn your metal around and take the edges like this. Take turns like this. And also remember that you can work with your second hand too. Hold the metal so you're not, pulling on it, so it's not jumping. If your saw blade is nagging on the metal, it's probably because you're using wrong saw blade. But if it's correct, for the metal thickness, that could be because you're not holding the metal sheet properly with your second hand. So give yourself this support. Also, remember that your saw frame cuts on a downward stroke because the teeth are pointing downwards. So when you are bringing it up, it doesn't do any cutting. So there's no point for you to be focusing on this motion and definitely not pressing or, adding any tension to it. So when you're bringing up the saw frame, make sure that you do it very gently, very lightly. You are just bringing it up to repeat another stroke for cutting. So only when your saw frame is going downwards, that's the only time when you want to add just a tiny bit of pressure, not tension. And when you are bringing it up, make it very light and smooth. And also when you're cutting, don't go aggressively. Like, you're not rushing anywhere. No one's rushing you. Do it slowly, do it gently, and use the entirety of your saw blade that you have available. You don't have to go in a very short, aggressive strokes. Just do the one proper stroke. Pull down, come back, pull down again, and really you don't have to, go like this. Another tip to not break your blades is a proper lubrication. So when you have a blade, it's important to put lubrication on it when it's already attached to the saw frame. For that, you can use beeswax, for example. You could use Pepe lube like this, or Pepe also created this blade butter recently, which is a new product, and it also works perfectly with lubricating drill bits and blades like this. Now you want to cut something out of metal sheet and you want to transfer your design onto it. How do you do that? Well, first way is to simply draw what you want to cut out directly on the metal. But honestly, if it's a simple shape, that's no problem. But what if it's something complicated? Well, there's several ways to go about it. My go-to used to be to print something out or draw it myself on paper and then stick it onto the double-sided tape, which essentially works like a sticker, because when you cut it out, then you just remove this paper here and you stick it onto the metal. Another one is to use label paper, for example, label printer, and print your designs on the paper like this. And you can also use just the regular glue. I've noticed people do that. So you print out or draw a design on the paper and then you stick it onto the metal directly like this. Right, okay, I think that's all. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have other questions, drop them in the comments below and I will get back to you and try to answer them. And I hope you've enjoyed it. See you again soon.